Hey guys! In today's tutorial, hey, wait, where the hell are you going? Ah, there you are. I hope you haven't come across anything unusual, but of course you haven't. Why would you? Let's move on. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to move your camera through floors and walls to transition into another scene. I bet you've seen many TV shows and films where the camera suddenly starts to move and passing through walls and floors as if they weren't even there, seamlessly transitioning to another scene. Now, there's multiple ways to create this effect. You could actually cut holes into your walls and floors where the camera needs to pass through, but that's just crazy talk. You could also set up a very elaborate CG shot, or for people like you and me, we can just fake the whole thing in After Effects. For this, we'll use a technique called 3D projection. 3D projection allows us to set up a light in After Effects and have a projected image or piece of footage onto any 3D layers we have in our scene. Given a flat piece of footage, this allows us to somewhat re-engineer the geometry of the original scene. We can then add a camera into the composition, move it around, and within limits, it will appear as if the camera is moving around inside the actual 3D scene. While this effect is not perfect and you can spot it if you look closely, it will enable us to create great camera through the wall and camera through the floor effects. Now, enough talking, I will meet you two floors up to show you how to create this effect inside of Adobe After Effects. I have taken a photo in a car park, which we'll use for the first part of this effect. Simply drag it onto the new composition icon to get started. Note that this effect works a lot better if your scene has a lot of depth and you can see a lot of the floor, the ceiling and the walls. There's one more important thing we need to configure. We will use a light to shine through a garage picture and project it onto the 3D geometry in the scene. This projection is technically the shadow of the garage image, and to ensure we see more than just a blurry mess, we want to increase the shadow quality of the composition. For this, open the composition settings, go to the Advanced tab and click on Options. Set the shadow map resolution to something big like 4000. Now let's get started converting this flat image into a 3D scene. Because this layer will disappear in a moment when we set up our projection, we want to duplicate the layer. You can press Ctrl D for this, rename the copy to Guide and turn it into a guide layer. A guide layer is visible in your composition but won't get rendered in the final effect. Lower its opacity to around 30. You still want to be able to see it, but it should be fairly faint. Create a new camera. Ensure that the focal length you select matches the camera you used to record your shot, otherwise you will have difficulty setting up this effect. I used a focal length of 35mm. Next, we also need to create a light which will shine through our garage image and project it onto the 3D layers we will set up. For this, create a new spotlight, set the light color to white, the intensity to 100 and the cone angle to 180 degrees. Make sure the fall of distance is fairly large, like 500, and most importantly, that the cast shadows option is enabled. Remember, we will use the shadows for our projection. We now need to position the camera, the light and the garage image at the exact same location. Reveal their position properties by selecting the layers and pressing P. Don't forget to turn the garage layer into a 3D layer. Now select the position of the camera, copy it, Ctrl C, and paste it, Ctrl V, onto the position of the garage image and onto the position of the light. If we go to the top view for a second, you should now see the light, the camera and the footage layer all at the same position. Select the garage image layer and move it out in front of the light, but only just a little bit. If you move it too far, the light may not be able to reach it anymore. If you go back to your active camera view, you should now see your garage image massively zoomed in. Don't move it any further away, instead simply grab the corners of the layer and scale it down until it looks like the original scene we had. Going back to the top view, you should now have your footage placed properly in front of the light so we can project it onto the 3D layers we will create. To set up the projection properly, we need to change a few material settings on the layer we want to project. Select the garage layer and hit AA to bring up the material options. Change the cast shadow options to shadows only by clicking on it twice. This will cause the layer to become invisible and you will notice that the scene suddenly got a whole lot darker because all we see now is the semi-transparent guide layer we set up. However, the layer will still be able to cast shadows, which in our case will be the projected image. Next, increase the light transmission property to 100%. This specifies that all light that hits this layer will pass through it unobstructed, but will pick up its color and project it as a shadow. We are now ready to set up the 3D layers that will function as the projection screen and catch the image of our garage layer. Create a new solid, call it floor, and ensure its color is set to white. Next, search for the grid effect and apply it to the layer. Don't forget to enable the 3D switch for the layer or you won't be able to access the material options. Now position the layer as best as you can in 3D space to fit over the floor of our scene. Scale it up and position it as deep in your scene as you need, but ensure that the lower edge of the layer sits just a tiny bit past the bottom of your composition. This should do. Next, open the material options for the solid by pressing AA. We do not want this layer to get brighter or darker as we move it away from the light we have in our scene. We want it to always be fully lit so that the shadow cast onto it, our projected image, is always fully visible. Therefore, we want to turn the accept light options off. Duplicate the floor layer, call it ceiling and position it over the ceiling. Repeat the same process for the right and left wall as well as for the back. Next, use the side and front views to ensure your room has no holes. Move your back wall closer if necessary and ensure that all the walls intersect so the back of your room is sealed off nicely. Any gaps will cause the same effect as having a physical hole in a movie screen. Return to your active view because it's finally time to do the magic trick. Disable all of the grid effects on the 3D layers that make up your room. Ta-da! Pretty impressive, right? Yeah, kind of looks like our composition without all the extra work. But wait, it might look the same from this angle, but if we move the camera around, we can see our garage image is actually being projected onto the 3D layers. We get a sense of moving around inside a three-dimensional environment. Reset your camera to the starting position. Let's animate our camera to sync through the floor. Open the camera properties. We want to animate the position, but we also need to make sure that the point of interest remains on the same height so we don't suddenly start looking up as the camera moves down. For this, we will use a quick expression. Enable keyframing for the camera position and then alt-click onto the stopwatch for the point of interest. In the small text field that appears, simply type open square bracket value, open square bracket 0, close square bracket, comma, then grab the pick whip icon and select the Y coordinate of the camera position, which represents the height, to insert it into the expression. Finish off the expression by typing comma, value, open square bracket 2, close square bracket and close another square bracket. This expression says use whatever value set for the X and Z coordinate of the point of interest, but keep the Y coordinate, the height, at the same level as the camera position. We can now keyframe the position of the camera to move downwards and it will look like we're sinking through the floor. The faded image of the scene in the background we see is simply our guide layer. Let's turn it off and watch that again. Looks pretty good so far. Now it's time to repeat the process for our second room. For this, let's first hide all the layers and the light we set up for the first scene. Besides turning off the visibility, you can also enable the shy flag on the layer. It looks like a little man hiding. If you then check the hide shy layers option, all of those layers will be hidden and our comp will be majorly uncluttered. The second image I'm going to use is a photo of my wine cellar, yes, that's what it is. Add this image into your composition, duplicate it and set up a guide layer exactly like we did before. Again, add a light with the same settings into the scene, reveal the position properties for the light, the camera and the footage and turn the wine cellar image into a 3D layer. Ensure you're at the time position where your camera is in the bottom room and copy the position information across to your footage layer and your light. Beware that the camera position has been keyframed and you do not want to copy those keyframes across. So I am going to copy the X, Y and Z coordinate independently. Also, on your light, you want to ensure that the point of interest has the same Y coordinate as the position of the light, otherwise it will be aiming off into the sky instead of at your layer. Just to be sure that everything is set up correctly, go to your top view and ensure this looks exactly like it did for the first scene. Now follow the exact same steps I showed you for the garage scene. I'm going to speed through this because there's absolutely nothing new here. Once you're done, scrub through your footage. It should look like your camera is falling through the ceiling and arriving in your wine cellar. Never mind that the top of your ceiling is white, we will cover that up in a moment. Let's unhide all the layers from the first scene and have a look at what we've got. Of course, there's still a gap between the two rooms as expected, but we'll fix that up in a moment and whoa, what the hell is that? This looks really nasty. If you wonder why the room suddenly looks like someone let Chewbacca paint the walls, this is caused by the wine cellar footage also being projected onto the layers from our first scene. If you disable the light used to project the wine cellar image, you will see what I mean. Leave the light on for now and don't worry, we'll get around to that shortly. For now, let's concentrate on closing the gap between the rooms. First of all, you want to switch to a side view and ensure that the floor edge of the top room lines up with the ceiling of the one below. You may have to reposition your layers, and because that will change the projection, you may have to adjust your floor, ceiling and wall layers to properly match the geometry of the scene. This should do. I took a picture of the concrete floor in the garage, and we will use this image to connect the two rooms. Simply drag the footage into your comp, make the layer 3D and disable the accept lights and accept shadows options. Position it to properly close the gap between the first and the second room. Place it a tiny bit closer to the camera so the edges of the floor and the ceilings do not show. Now obviously the concrete texture is way too bright, so let's add a curves adjustment to it and bring down the brightness by quite a bit. If we play back the composition, I'd say our effect looks pretty cool already. Actually, I will also bring up the green just a tad to match my footage. There, that fits much better. Now let's get rid of the ugly double projection of the textures. For that, we will have to pre-compose the scenes independently to separate them and avoid the projections being cast onto layers of both rooms. This, however, may not be as straightforward because the moment you pre-compose your 3D layers, the created new composition is strictly two-dimensional and other 3D layers won't obscure its contents. Let's pre-compose the first scene so you can see what I mean. First, we want to duplicate the camera because it needs to be included in the composition for both scenes. Then select all layers for the first scene, including a copy of the camera, and pre-compose them. I'm going to call my composition Room 1 and hit OK. Voila, the ugly double projection is gone. Now make yet another copy of the camera, select it and all of the layers for the second room, except for the concrete connecting piece we added, and pre-compose them. Strange as it may seem, I am going to call this one Room 2. The white ugly bar at the bottom of the screen is coming from Room 2, and we can fix this simply by dragging the layer for Room 1 to the top. If we play back our scene, it will work nicely. Well, not quite. The ugly ass end of the first scene appears to be poking through the ceiling of our wine cellar. This is because, as I mentioned before, both rooms are pre-composed and their 3D layers don't know anything about each other. We can, however, fix this up very simply by using an animated mask. Select the garage scene and add a mask to it, covering the area we want to hide. Set it to subtract mode and animate it to come in just in time to hide the unwanted back end of the layer. And with that, we're finally done. Play back your footage for a really cool transition effect from one scene into another. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and as always, please leave any comments, questions or suggestions in the section below. Please subscribe or you may end up in someone's dank, dark basement. Please subscribe if you want to see more, or come and stalk me on Facebook or Twitter. Until next time, I will see you later.